Have you ever had this experience with your child? You ask them to go do something, maybe it's put on their shoes because you need to get going somewhere. They don't do it. You find them wandering around aimlessly. You ask them again, hey, let's get on our shoes. We've got to get going. They look like they're going to do it. They get totally distracted on the way and don't do it. Now you really have to go. They still don't have their shoes on. Their focus, attention is not what it should be. And so today we're going to talk about that focus and attention and see, are there things that we need to watch out for? Are there things that we can do? So thanks for joining me again today. I'm Joya Laan, a family nurse practitioner, a functional medicine specialist, and an autism mom. Attention and focus issues can be such a big problem and frustration for us and for our kids with autism. Not only autism, but about 30% of our kids also have ADHD, which then, sometimes has these overlapping characteristics with autism, but the ADHD adds an additional complication. So let's talk about some things that we can look at and even do to help our kids. Let's start with neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are things like serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, GABA or gamma aminobutyric acid. GABA is what I'll refer to it as. Let's talk a little bit about what each of those neurotransmitters does and how they're related to behavior and attention and focus. Let's first start with dopamine. Dopamine is responsible for a few things in the brain. Here's a list. Dopamine is responsible for impulse control, prioritization, focus, decision-making, frustration tolerance, and time management. And those are only a few of the things. So we can all identify at least one or two of those things in our autistic children that may be a problem. The interesting thing is, in children with autism, it's been shown that there are discrepancies and different errors in dopamine production and transport, dopamine metabolism. And so what can we do about that? At the risk of sounding like a broken record, zinc. It's very interesting. In a lot of the research that I've done, zinc has been shown to actually reverse some of the issues in our kids with their dopamine transport, production, and metabolism issues. And I'll actually put a link in the notes below so you can have a read over that too if you're curious about that. The next neurotransmitter is norepinephrine, NE for short. A few of the things that norepinephrine does: concentration and focus, memory and perseverance. So again, we see these issues commonly with our children. There's less information on what we can do about a norepinephrine imbalance, but it's important to remember that balance of neurotransmitters is really important. And sometimes when you balance out one, you balance out the others. And also, if you get to the root of the problem, in other words, potentially, is there some gut dysbiosis going on that's causing kind of this imbalance of neurotransmitters in general? Instead of directly addressing each neurotransmitter specifically, do we maybe need to address what's going on in the digestive system? Inflammation, overgrowth, dysbiosis, that kind of thing. GABA is another neurotransmitter. The important thing about GABA to remember is that GABA, or gamma aminobutyric acid, we'll just call it GABA, is one of the primary inhibitory neurotransmitters, meaning it kind of brings us down. Now, that's opposed by glutamate, which is our primary excitatory or exciting neurotransmitter. Now, both of them are necessary in our brains, but if they're out of balance, we've got issues. Typically, in our autistic kiddos, GABA is low. And so there are a few options, a few things we want to think about. First, you may have seen GABA supplementation. You can give children anywhere from 250 to even 750, 1,000 milligrams, sometimes split throughout the day. You can also look at things like gut dysbiosis and food sensitivities, nutrient and mineral deficiencies, because very often it's not that the child isn't producing GABA or has a deficiency primarily in producing that GABA, but sometimes it's the precursors. What steps come ahead of that that may be being disrupted by various food sensitivities, gut dysbiosis, nutrient and mineral deficiencies. Serotonin may be sort of the neurotransmitter that you have heard of, if you've heard of any of these. Serotonin is often classified as our sort of happy hormone. A lot of the antidepressant medications out there are actually meant to increase the availability of serotonin in our brains, but they also have to do with irritability and even facial processing. So think about that in terms of how our kiddos look at other people and process things like facial expressions and other nonverbal communication. That may be an issue, right? So what can we do then about serotonin? Well, we know that tryptophan is a precursor to serotonin. However, it's not always advisable to just give straight tryptophan. So I don't want you to run out and just give your child tryptophan. Something to consider too, even though we all want the natural remedies, or many of us do, is that an SSRI, or a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, like Zoloft, Paxil, Prozac, those kinds of medications that are often used for people who struggle with depression, can be actually very helpful for our children if they're experiencing symptoms of a serotonin deficit or deficiency. I'm kind of going to talk about food sensitivities, gut dysbiosis, and nutrient deficiencies all in one because they're so wrapped up in each other. You know, a lot of our kids have restricted eating, which then predisposes them to these nutrient deficiencies, whether it's zinc, magnesium, iron, vitamin D, folate. You know, all these things are so necessary for proper brain functioning and for focus and attention. So it may be worth investigating, you know, is my child getting enough of this in their diet? And even further than that, a lot of times our autistic children just are predisposed to certain nutrient deficiencies anyways, like for instance, the folate, right? We've talked a little bit about methylation before, but folate, magnesium, even zinc are nutrients that are so important for proper methylation. And one of the things methylation is responsible for is production and processing of neurotransmitters, which affect attention and focus. So we've kind of come full circle there. With gut dysbiosis, remember the gut and the brain are so connected. So if there is a gut overgrowth of, say, yeast or Clostridia, or if the balance of good bacteria is not quite right, that certainly can affect the focus and attention as a result of either the child being uncomfortable and unable to focus, or because of the imbalance of the neurotransmitters caused by the imbalance in the gut. Now, the third thing is food sensitivities. Remember, if our kids are eating foods that they're sensitive to, there can be a whole host of symptoms, including gut issues, see point B, or inflammation, right, which also can lead to gut issues. Or maybe they're just plain uncomfortable. You're giving them yogurt or something for snack, right, and they happen not to tolerate dairy. They're bloated, their stomachs hurt. It's hard to pay attention when you're in pain. So think about all these things when we're thinking about focus and attention. It may not just be as simple as giving a medication for ADHD, right? We want to look at, is there a root cause that we can address? Well, thanks for joining me again on Your Autism Game Plan. I hope I've provided a valuable resource and some valuable information for you here. Remember to check out this week's Friday favorites for a few of my sort of favorite and most used tools that we use to help keep our kids attentive and focused as much as possible. Remember, be gentle with yourself. You're doing a great job.